Hello and welcome to West Virginia Press Insight, a production of the West Virginia newspaper industry. I'm Tom Hunter.
And I'm Betsy DeBoard. Like you, we're interested in issues impacting West Virginia.
West Virginia Press Insight focuses on policy and impact, not politics or personalities.
In this episode, we're looking at the following issues: teacher pay raises, Black History Month, legislation addressing abortion, the industrial personal property tax, job creation, 100 days in Appalachia, and plans for West Virginia's state parks.
Newspapers across the state have been reporting on how teachers are responding to Governor Jim Justice's proposed 1% pay raise. Justice and legislative leaders have said that's all the state can afford at this point, with the promise of 1% raises in each of the next 4 years for teachers. However, recent House proposals bumped the initial raise for teachers to 2% in that first year. A 1% raise this year in each of the next 2 years has been proposed for other state employees. That hasn't gone over well with most educators, however, with hundreds of teachers from Logan, Mingo, and Wyoming counties coming to the state capitol in early February to make their voices heard on the issue. Since then, teachers from Mercer County to Mason County to Marshall County have either held votes on a potential strike or had walk-ins prior to the start of the school day. In addition to being unhappy about pay, teachers have expressed frustration with increasing PEIA insurance premiums while benefits are being reduced. They say it amounts to a pay cut, and they want changes to stabilize the program for the long term. Governor Justice says he's working on changes that will address the teachers' concerns without busting the state budget, and legislators say they're willing to look at all options on the table.
Do you really trust me? And if you do, then I would tell you just this, and I can't be more simple than just this. We in this state should not jump to a 3 or 4% raise today. What we should do is do just what I've proposed. We should fix PEI to where it makes your life better, and you should trust in the fact that if in fact these numbers bear fruit and we just don't crash, I'll come right back in and bump you even more and bump you even more and get you where you want to go.
You know, Tom, this certainly seems like an issue that is going to be front and center for this final month of the session.
Yeah, Betsy, representatives from both the major teachers unions in the state, the WVEA and AFT, say they're hearing from their members all across West Virginia and they don't know what actions might be taken.
Yeah, and public employees are not permitted to strike in West Virginia, although no action was taken against those in the 3 counties involved earlier this month. Schools in those locations closed on the day the teachers came to the Capitol.
And of course, the last time we saw things get this heated involving teacher pay in the state was back in 1990. When teachers actually did stage a walkout during Governor Gaston Caperton's administration. The teachers went back to work after a pledge that they would get a raise, which they did during a special session later that year.
While most teachers receive experience increments each year, they haven't had an across-the-board raise since 2014. With the state budget in a little better shape than it has been in recent years, they want to be sure that they get their share of the additional dollars.
Legislative leaders discussed progress at the state capitol with members of the state media at the recent West Virginia Press Association legislative breakfast, with lawmakers now working past the halfway point toward the conclusion of the 60-day regular session. As Brett Dunlap of the Parkersburg News and Sentinel and Jim Workman of the West Virginia Press Association report, House of Delegates Speaker Tim Armstead, House Minority Leader Tim Miley, and Senate Minority Leader Roman Prezioso reviewed the current legislative session addressing several issues.
I really truly believe that in terms of moving our economy forward, our tax structure, our infrastructure, our legal and regulatory climate, and particularly our education system are keys to that. But we also have to deal with the drug epidemic that we're facing in our state. And so we're trying to work in each of those areas during this session.
Armstead thinks the drug epidemic in West Virginia needs to be attacked from various angles. 2 keys are preventing children from getting addicted and finding a workable solution to help those with addictions. Armstead referenced legislation calling for another $30 million for addiction treatment in 2018.
Delegate Miley pointed out that the correctional system is now forced to lower its hiring qualifications, saying that Democrats are prioritizing public employee wages before addressing business and industry concerns.
The speaker alluded to it, the public employee and teacher pay raises but most notably the correctional officer pay raises. I mean, if indeed there is a state of emergency, and we've called the National Guard out to go into our correctional facilities, I don't know why we didn't jump on that right away, but to date we haven't. I'm sure that will happen, but I just thought that would have been something that we would have done right away.
Miley is also concerned about the accuracy of the budget numbers being discussed.
Which quite frankly gives rise for us to pause about how much available money there is in the state of West Virginia, which again is consistent with our belief that while we are slowly improving, we're not there and out of the woods yet.
Senator Prezioso said, watch the January revenue report. The General Revenue Fund collections were $28.2 million below estimate, and that's not a good sign.
Watch this month's revenue that we get, and it'll probably be out the end of the day. It's going to be a true indicator of where we're going.
The number of non-certified teachers in the state, 725, has Senator Prezioso and many West Virginians concerned that school is being a daycare system instead of a learning environment.
Education is the foundation of our country. There's no question about it. And I heard the speaker, he said education is key. We have to give teachers the ability to go into the classroom and teach. And there's no question about that. But don't you think the first thing we have to do is put the teacher in the classroom? Do you want your children to go to school where there's 725 non-certified teachers? I certainly don't. Our kids have to compete globally. They have to compete in math and science, and those teachers are hard to find.
Highway construction and the energy sector have the potential to create jobs and economic opportunities throughout the Mountain State. That's according to multiple speakers at the West Virginia Press Association's annual legislative breakfast held recently in Charleston. Brett Dunlap of the Parkersburg News and Sentinel reports that State Transportation Secretary Tom Smith equates road construction with jobs, and the $1.6 billion bond issue that passed last fall will create tens of thousands of new jobs across the state. Mike Clauser, Executive Director of the Contractors Association of West Virginia, says the past 5 years have been especially tough for his members. Now they're excited to be hiring people. A job fair is scheduled for February 16th at Bridge Valley Community and Technical College in South Charleston, and more will be set as summer approaches.
On the energy side, Marcellus Shale development continues to bring opportunities to the northern part of the state in particular. With the potential for billions of dollars in Chinese investment on the horizon, more downstream jobs are likely to come to the state. And Chris Hamilton, Vice President of the West Virginia Coal Association, says that there's a positive stir in the air and reason to be optimistic for the coal industry. Hamilton says international markets are driving a comeback for West Virginia miners.
And Betsy, one thing everyone says they want to be sure of is that West Virginians are filling as many of these job openings as possible. The State Department of Transportation and West Virginia Contractors Association have pledged to do that, and many other organizations are stepping in to help with that effort.
And Steve White, Executive Director of the Affiliated Construction Trades Foundation, says apprenticeship programs can help train people for jobs in growing sectors. That includes road and bridge construction, painting, and the tasks associated with building pipelines and other natural gas developments. And even in cases where out-of-state workers have to come in, that will help with other parts of the state's economy, such as hotels and restaurants.
Major work is supposed to start this summer on road construction, according to Transportation Secretary Tom Smith. So along with all those jobs are going to come plenty of orange barrels, so be sure to use caution as those road building efforts commence.
A pair of abortion proposals brought dozens of speakers and large groups on both sides of the issue to the Capitol. Taylor Stuck reports in the Herald-Dispatch of Huntington that nearly 50 people spoke about House Bill 4012 during a public hearing in the House of Delegates chamber. That proposal would prohibit the use of Medicaid funds to pay for abortions unless it would save the life of the mother. That bill, modeled after a federal restriction, is aimed at reversing a 1993 West Virginia Supreme Court ruling that Medicaid must cover medical services, including abortion. The majority of speakers opposed the House bill, with many saying it would discriminate against low-income women. A physician said it could cause confusion among medical professionals as to whom can receive the procedure. Proponents say tax dollars shouldn't pay for abortions, and they want to protect the sanctity of life. On the same day as the public hearing, the Senate Judiciary Committee passed a resolution to amend the state constitution, specifically state that abortions are not a protected right.
And Betsy, abortion laws are always an emotional issue. And it seems like for the past several years, lawmakers have had a proposal for new restrictions in front of them. Of course, as we recall, former Governor Earl Ray Tomblin vetoed 2 of these bills in recent years, although the legislature overrode his veto both times.
The bill will continue to be considered by the House of Delegates, with potential Senate action waiting if the House approves it. It's also quite possible that if it passes, opponents would pursue a court challenge.
Now, if the resolution dealing with the state constitution passes, supporters say it could clear the way for a state ban on abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned on the federal level. Opponents say the measure is being discussed for purely political purposes, and they are sad to see low-income women being used as pawns in this debate.
Yes, the Senate has this item first, although supporters say they expect widespread support from the House of Delegates.
State officials say the industrial personal property tax is destructive to the economic health of West Virginia. Jim Workman reports on the issue for the West Virginia Press Association. The issue was discussed during a recent meeting of the House of Delegates Finance Committee. Workman reports Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher calls the tax the greatest impediment to economic growth in the Mountain State. The recent West Virginia Forward study commissioned by West Virginia University and Marshall University with the State Department of Commerce noted West Virginia's industrial personal property tax, or TPP, was a negative outlier in a state business tax package that ranged in the top 20 of the nation. Revenue Secretary Dave Hardy and Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher presented and fielded questions from delegates at the meeting. The proposal requires a constitutional amendment to remove the tax, which means both the House and Senate would have to approve the measure by a 2/3 majority. They then would have to put removal of the tax on the November 2018 ballot to seek voter approval. Most of the money generated by the tax goes to county school systems, which has caused some local officials to express concerns about how to replace that funding. The amendment would phase out the tax and replace those dollars, supporters say, although some people express concern that the future estimates can be hard to make accurately. This bill centers on industrial and personal property. Logan County Democrat Richard Ojeda recently introduced a bill that would raise oil and gas severance taxes by 2.5% for teacher raises, stating it would generate $70 million in revenue today, possibly upwards of $300 million in revenue in the future as the natural gas industry grows. Before the industrial personal property tax issue is decided, we'll probably see numbers of what the existing industrial personal property tax, generating $140 million today, might generate in tax revenue if left in place as the natural gas industry continues its growth. Workman also reports that Chris Hopkins, director of the State Development Office, says that he hears concerns about the inventory tax time and again. Businesses of all sizes are affected by it, and he believes eliminating it will create new growth. The West Virginia Manufacturers Association also supports the change and says it could help to diversify the economy. Some others say that before the state cuts additional business taxes, it should look at ways to stabilize PEIA, give teachers bigger pay raises, and find ways to help consumers and families.
In this week's WVU Today segment, West Virginia University Reed College of Media Dean Mary Ann Reed discusses the 100 Days in Appalachia project. As Reed explains to April Call, the college wants to help students be better news consumers in a changing environment.
I'm April Call, and I'm here on the steps of Martin Hall, the home of the Reed College of Media here at WVU, and I'm with the Dean, Mary Ann Reed. And Mary Ann, it's been a very busy start to the semester here at the Reed College. You're in the midst of a project called 100 Days in Appalachia. Tell me about this project.
We started this project at the beginning of the Trump presidency, the day after the inauguration, and our goal was to do what we called a pop-up publication, digital publication that our students could be involved in which we looked at issues that were impacting this region through the prism of the new administration, but also for an external audience. Because our thought was there is so much negative coverage about West Virginia. There's so many people from the outside coming in trying to tell our story. Let's tell our story to an outside audience so that we can really explore the complexities of the region, the issues that we face, and the opportunities that are ahead of us.
Why do you feel that this project is so important?
It's an incredible learning experience for our students to be involved in a publication that has a national and international audience, and really that level of publishing for our students. But I think it's really important that we tell the story of our region at this particular time because the outside world is finally paying attention.
What have you learned as you've gone through the 100 Days in Appalachia project so far?
Well, it's been incredibly rewarding. We've had a pretty strong following nationally and internationally, and we realized we struck a chord.
And the project is now expanding. You recently received a grant in order to further this project.
We received a grant from the Democracy Fund. We've also received a grant from the Benedum Foundation. So we anticipate that this 100 Days in Appalachia project will continue well into the next 18 months of the administration.
I said it's been a very busy semester here at the Reed College, and that's because you also have a digital media course that you've started to help people be better consumers of news, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, of course, we've heard a lot about fake news, right? That has been a big issue over the past year, around beginning with the presidential election, and so we felt we had an obligation as a College of Media, not just to prepare our students to be producers of media, but to be better consumers of media.
Be sure to get the latest news and information from West Virginia University anytime at wvutoday.wvu.edu.
West Virginia's 2018 observance of Black History Month began with the third annual Celebration of Diversity event held at the West Virginia Culture and History Great Hall. Coordinated by the Herbert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs, the celebration reflected upon the progress West Virginians have made toward equality. There are numerous Black History Month activities in communities across the state. Fred Pace of the Herald-Dispatch of Huntington reported on the Soul Food Feast at Marshall University. For more than 25 years, the Soul Food Feast has attracted Marshall students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members. At West Virginia State University's Campus and Institute, the Martin Luther King Jr. State Holiday Commission held its 6th annual Celebration of Diversity. The primary focus was showcasing the artwork of K-12 students in West Virginia and honoring the winners of the Martin Luther King Jr. poster contest.
The event at Marshall was a great time to catch up with old friends and make new ones over traditional soul food dishes. As Marshall Vice President Maurice Cooley said, it's a joyful time to celebrate in the spirit of love while enjoying the best of soul food dishes. He noted the annual celebration is a time of fellowship with friends, family, and others from throughout the community.
Yeah, and Betsy, it's a real honor for students to have their artwork on display at the state's Culture Center during the month of February. Of course, the public can visit the West Virginia Culture Center on the campus of the state capitol and see their work at absolutely no cost.
And the events are a great time to celebrate Black history and the significant contributions of West Virginians to the freedoms that we have in this country. Up next, West Virginia Press Association Executive Director Don Smith goes in depth with Steve McDaniel, Director of West Virginia Division of Natural Resources, and Barry Cook, West Virginia Division of Forestry Director, about DNR plans for our state parks.
Welcome to In Depth. I'm Don Smith, and today we're talking with Steve McDaniel, Director of the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources, and Barry Cook, West Virginia's Division of Forestry Director. We're going to talk about the West Virginia DNR plan for our state parks. Barry, Steve, and On Depth, we try to find out more information. There's legislation you're proposing that addresses the sound management of our state park lands and includes the harvesting of timber. Now, for some people in West Virginia, when they hear harvesting of timber, that's the end of the conversation. They don't want to hear anything else. But Governor Jim Justice, Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher, and others have said that if the public understood this plan, they might have a different opinion. So what I want today is to get your perspective on this plan, outline what's going to happen, and let the people know what they need to look at. Steve, what's probably the one thing that the public is most misinformed about on this plan?
Well, Don, the one thing, as you said, when you start talking about cutting trees in state park, it's a very emotional issue. And people tend to look at that as being a negative. And what we want to try to do with this plan is to go into a small percentage of our parks and create some wildlife diversity areas in these forests based on sound silvicultural practices that were laid out by the Forestry Division, working with our biologists from Wildlife Diversity and our district biologists to take a look at some of these areas to where we can go in and create wildlife viewing trails. And the reason that I'm interested in that part is, I've been charged by the governor to do what I can to create tourism within the state of West Virginia, working with Chelsea Ruby and the Division of Tourism. Right. Well, one thing that we know from the 2016 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service survey is that 85 million people participated in some form of wildlife viewing. And that's 85 million people over the age of 16. So you're talking about 40% of the United States population went somewhere or did something where they viewed wildlife. In our West Virginia state parks are beautiful, but they are mature forests. And you only get a small part of the types of wildlife that roam throughout West Virginia.
Well, Steve, to that, I know that some of these forests, I was surprised, state parks, how large they are, 10,000 acres, over 5,000 acres. And I've lived all over West Virginia and traveled and been in the state parks. And I hunt and I fish, but I realize from looking over this plan that most of what I've seen has been from the trails, and I'm looking at the maps that you guys have out. Clearly there are big parts of the parks that I've never been to, and I can imagine that most West Virginians haven't been to those.
That's
so
very
this
true.
would address that too, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, I mean you have areas, as you said before, we have some parks that are as large as 10,000 acres. Maybe 20% of that, 2,000 acres, is where we see the majority of the activity during the spring and summer months. What we want to do is we want to take some of those areas that are not really accessible unless you're a backcountry hiker, and we want to create these wildlife viewing, wildlife diversity trails, so families, the elderly, people that don't have access to those areas can go and visit these trails. Now we're talking about reclaiming these areas, planting pollinator fields, native species, creating habitat for wildlife. The ruffed grouse in West Virginia has all but disappeared on public lands, and it's because of the loss of habitat, because we haven't really managed our forests on our public lands for so many years.
Well, I know that some of the things I hear, people are worried about habitat in these parks, but this plan, and I read over the plan, I was amazed at the limitations it puts on what can be done. But this isn't coming in and saying we're going to, and you actually hear these comments, clear cut a state park, or this will impact the entire park, they'll have to shut the park down. This is designated and controlled, is it what I can read so far?
Very much so. Yeah, you have you're limited to the number of trees that can be removed over the harvest area, and you can only remove half of the volume of any 1 acre, which totally precludes ever being able to clear cut an area. So that the public should be completely relieved that there will be absolutely no clear cutting in any state park.
And Barry, this isn't, with a forest that large, a state park that large, you're not going to have to be in some of the key areas that are popular with the public now.
Yeah, we have no intentions of doing that. Steve can make reference, but to some of these areas more specifically. But areas where of popularity, view sheds, and areas where people go to look at overlooks and canyons and things of that nature. We will never be to those areas because of the whole intent, as Steve said, is to open up areas that the public now has no access to.
Well, Steve, one of the things I've heard is, doesn't matter how many trees you cut, you got to cut a road in to cut them. Mm-hmm. But from what I can hear from you and what I'm seeing is, you guys are saying that the roads are actually going to be the benefit, a part of the benefit of this. So now they have to be reclaimed.
Yes.
So there would be some initial impact, but then they'll be reclaimed and there'll be benefit there, correct?
Yes. The plan is to sit down with the Division of Forestry and let them come up with a silvicultural plan for a particular area in a forest. Then we'll bring in our biologists, our wildlife diversity biologists, our district wildlife biologists, and we'll work with forestry to choose these areas, choose what kinds of trees we want to cut. The governor has been adamant from the beginning is that no one loves state parks more than Governor Justice, and he wanted to make sure that when we went into this area that there would be no clear cutting. The 4 trees per acre aggregate. Now people say, oh gosh, how can you log at 4 trees per acre? Well, that's an aggregate. So let's say we choose 2,000 acres in a remote area in a state park. That allows us to cut up to 8,000 trees on that tract of land. Now we're going to stay away from the steep slopes. We're going to stay away from the watersheds. But we can go in, and if you find a tract of timber, we can, under this bill, we can still cut up to 50% of the timber on any given acre. So that if you walk into a forest and you've got 50 beautiful red oak trees, when this is done, you're going to have over half of those there, because there are other species that our wildlife biologists and our diverse people are going to want to take out that don't do the forest any good, like striped maple, and Barry can talk more about that. But we're going to go in, and the revenues, first and foremost, all the revenues that are created by the sale of these timbers will be put right back into creating these wildlife diversity trails. Because we're going to bring in professional trail building groups, and I'd love to show you some pictures sometime of what some of the savannas that we have created with some of our conservation friends, that after Barry's folks leave a logging area, they're just beautiful wildlife areas, and that's all we're trying to create with this.
The replacement of the 50, if you cut 25 of the 50 trees, is that something you have to worry about, or is that nature?
It can be both, but really hardwoods regenerate themselves naturally, either from seed source that's in the ground or through stump sprouts. The forests that exist in the state of West Virginia basically regenerated themselves naturally after the turn of the century and the harvesting that took place in the state. The reason we have the forest today is through natural regeneration. And
gentlemen, you believe in the information. You have a website out. You have 4R Future, which is if you go to the WVDNR.gov website, you can go to the 4R Future and see some of the information. But you maintain that this plan will not only open up the forest, but will make the forest healthier.
Yes,
absolutely.
I'll let Barry talk about
that. And not only that, but it gives us access for fire prevention. Right now, some of these remote areas, if we happen to have a wildfire in some of these areas, it's very difficult to get to these areas to suppress the fire that could be caused by lightning or something of that nature. But this will also aid in that.
And Barry, we talked a little earlier getting ready for this, and you pointed out that in a lot of these areas, the public would be surprised to get in. There are down trees, there are mature trees that have fallen, there are trees that areas that really aren't accessible because of things like that, and they're dangerous in some ways, for fires and for other things.
Yes. Dawn, did you know that as the law states right now, what we can do in state parks, these hurricanes come through here. Hurricane Duratio came through back. We had over $100,000 worth of timber laying on the forest floor in one of our parks, and you know that we could not sell those to a logging company? They had to rot on the forest floor. If we couldn't cut them up and reuse them in the parks, we had to let them lay there and rot. Under a plan like this, if a hurricane comes through and knocks down $250,000 worth of timber, we can have a logging company come in and harvest that timber and take it out of there. Now, $250,000 worth of timber laying and rotting on a harvest floor, or rotting on the floor, or harvesting it and putting that money back into that park.
And again, so the public out there is concerned, the money that comes from this timber is going to stay in the park system or in that park.
The governor has come out and said every dollar that is generated in a particular park that is left over after it's reclaimed will stay in that park.
Okay. People who want more information about this, or who want to express an opinion, who have a concern, what's the best way for them to get that concern to you or to get more information? Is it go to the website and look at the information you have available?
Believe me, we're getting a lot of questions and a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, but I urge those people out there who support this plan to come out, because I have literally gotten hundreds of emails and text messages from folks who support a good sound silvicultural practices on our state forests and state lands.
Okay. Likewise.
Okay. The outcome of this, then, we're going to see, from your point of view, and there's other point of views, but from your point of views, we're going to see healthier forest with less danger of fires and other issues, with greater access, more public availability, trails, new things that didn't exist, better environment for the animals and the growth in the forest, and more money to maintain that park.
That park, the majority of the money will go back into reclaiming the area. Yeah. I want everyone to understand that. The majority of the money, because of the types of timbering that we're going to be doing, it's not going to be a typical commercial logging area. So the revenues are not going to be equal to what you would do in a state forest or on private land. The majority of the monies will be put back into these areas to create wildlife diversity. Right. What I see in the future would be about 7 parks probably, with maybe a 3 or 4 mile wildlife diversity trail, unlike anything that you will see in the eastern United States.
Absolutely.
I mean, these will be beautiful areas that will have the entire public will be able to access. That's what our ultimate goal is with this program.
Now you maintain about 50 parks in the state, correct?
35 parks,
35?
2 rail
Okay.
trails, and 91 wildlife management areas.
Okay. And for the most part, this work will not be visible for where the public is spending its time now. It will be done in areas outside of the general population area where possible, and areas that are standing there right now and accessible.
Correct. When Barry and I first started discussing this program last spring, that was a concern of mine. In our parks, I wanted to make sure that in those heavy use areas around our park lodges, that we didn't have to have the logging trucks coming out. When he looked at some of the parks that we were thinking about doing, he said, look, we are already, there are private areas, there are public roads. The public will never know that this is going on because we're so far away from the footprint. Remember, these are very large parks. And I wanted to make sure so the public understands. We're not talking about logging in Blackwater Canyon or the New River Gorge or at Babcock or any of these beloved areas that people go to where we get probably 90% of our visitors. I had somebody put on Facebook that Cathedral State Park would be logged under this program. Now, Don, I don't know if you know, we have about 3 stands of virgin timber in West Virginia, and Cathedral State Park is one of them. It was almost offensive for somebody to say Cathedral State Park. I mean, I'm very humbled given the opportunity to protect West Virginia's natural resources, and I know he feels the same way. To say things like that, it's just not true.
Yeah.
And I want to close on this. Our parks, from what I hear, need improvement. There is not, but funding's limited. So there's not money to do these trails and these improvements without this type of a program. So it's a two benefit in a sense. You're going to improve the health, and in doing it, create the trails and have some money to maintain that.
Yeah, we're going to create additional recreational opportunities, which is what we have to do to get people to spend more time here. Chelsea Ruby will tell you our goal in West Virginia is to get over that little over 2 days per visitor. We want to get up to 4.5 days, which is the national average, and then that'll pull us out of 50th in tourism. We have to find ways to keep people here for longer periods, and this is just an opportunity for an additional recreation type facility.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I don't have to tell you that there are people out there who, regardless of what we're able to look at or you're able to explain as the benefits of the plan, won't support the plan.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to give you a chance to come in and talk about what the benefits are, to give the public more information, and to tell the public where to go get more information and how to comment. So we thank you for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Thank
Thank you, Don.
Next on West Virginia Press Insight, we'll go to Betsy DeBoer for a look at skiing in West Virginia in February and in March. Great times to be on the slopes.
Dave Lavender of the Herald-Dispatch of Huntington reports that recent snow and cold weather has all 5 of West Virginia's downhill ski resorts offering prime skiing and snowboarding conditions in February. Snowshoe Mountain, Timberline, Canaan Valley, Winter Place, Oglebay Park, and the state's largest cross-country ski area, Whitegrass, are all offering excellent conditions. Joe Stevens, Executive Director of the West Virginia Ski Areas Association, said the West Virginia ski industry is excited for one of the biggest weekends of the year, the President's Day weekend. But Stevens also reminds West Virginians that March is one of the best skiing months in the state. While many areas of the state start to turn green in March, Stevens said the state's ski areas still have great conditions. To see live conditions at the state's resorts, visit the ski industry's webcams at goskiwv.com. There's still a lot of time to visit West Virginia's winter resorts for skiing, tubing, snowboarding, or just having a fun weekend.